Your arm off is his message of survival. And in ministry, it's meaningful that you know things like that and know what's about to happen when you deal with certain people and certain things a certain way, because they're conditioned to respond a certain way. And that's your free part. That's ministry one-on-one. Every once in a while you will have on national television what they call the Presidential State of the Union. It's an address. Okay. This is your pastor's heart of address and towards some things that we're looking at in our day. And I'm going to Hebrews 5 to set things in gear, and we'll read a couple of scriptures from there about learn something about the heart of a minister and the heart of ministry and the heart of God. In this house, we define ministry as meeting the needs of people in the name of Jesus, by the power of the Holy Spirit, to the glory of God the Father. So all of that works together. Meeting the needs and speaking to the needs. Do you understand that God's concerned about the needs of people, whether they're saved or not? Do you think he just loves saved folk? And you think he just ministers to saved folk? I'm going to tell you, Jesus knew from the beginning who Judas was. Okay? And he ministered to him anyway. And I'm going to take this heart of ministry and I'm going to connect it to a message about the homeless that I will call strangers in our streets. And I told Debbie, since we have homes that we live in and we visit the streets every once in a while, and they don't have homes and they live in the street, who's the stranger in the street? And understanding God's heart and God's ministry, how we speak to things. I got a thought on life that says, and I learned it from Jerry Cook, what is becomes normal. What is becomes normal, and everything that's not normal is considered strange. There are things that were once considered normal that are now considered strange. Okay. And there were things that were once considered strange that people now consider normal. Y'all understand that? We were having our Thursday morning minister's prayer breakfast, pastor's prayer breakfast at the Skillet, and it's always time of great revelation. We share heart to heart, and God built some solid foundation for relationship and walking and warring and walking together. See, I believe that the reason God built the sanctuary the way God built the sanctuary, all God had to do was say sanctuary, and the sanctuary would be there. But he was building the people with different giftings to give, and was building them in a way that they could walk together so they could work together, and one day they'll war together. Building relationships. Can these people follow a vision and each do his part and put together what I'm building? And when we do, God will inhabit that. But we were talking about, it must have been one of the hot days, and we're talking about somebody enjoying the benefits of air conditioning. And Brother Jerry McDonald said, well, when I grew up, we didn't have air conditioning. He said, we didn't even have a fan. He said, we didn't need a fan because there's nowhere to plug it in. We didn't have electricity. Do you know that there was a day that was normal? And to have electricity and all this stuff we have was abnormal and strange? If you took your great-great-grandfather, thought changes and what's expected among the people of God in church. If I'd have told my granddaddy, you need to be concerned about meeting your wife's emotional needs, he would have said, what planet did you fall off of? Not that they didn't, but when it becomes normal, it builds an expectancy among people. And then when expectancies are not met, people are offended because there's a new normal in things. And I don't care whether that's good or bad. That's just sort of the way things work. And so we're going to read Hebrews 5 and set it up. Bobby, I'm going to begin in verse 1 and just read a couple of verses. Bobby's got this magic thing where he can write it on the wall up here. Hebrews 5:1, for every high priest, and we're talking about the ministry of Jesus. So we're talking about every high priest taken from among men is ordained for men in things pertaining to God. You could meditate on that a long time. He's there taken from among men, and he's ordained for men in things that pertain to God, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sin. Who can have compassion on the ignorant and on them that are out of the way, because he himself also is compassed with infirmities. The New American Standard. Every high priest taken from among men is appointed on behalf of men in things that are pertaining to God, in order to offer both gifts and sacrifices for sin. He can deal gently with the ignorant and misguided, since he got issues too. Okay. Since he was in all points tempted like as we are. Now we're talking about ministry, and he's taken from among men, chosen out from among men for things that pertain unto God. And there are two groups of people that call for special compassion in this group. Number one, the ignorant, the not knowing, people who just don't know. And number two, them that are out of the way, which is taken and translated from a Greek word that's usually translated deceived. So you got the ignorant who don't know, and the deceived who are wrong and don't know they don't know. You know. I want to say about my singing and Brother Woodward singing. There are folks that can sing. There's folks that can't sing. There are folks that can't sing and know they can't sing, and there's folks that can't sing and don't know they can't sing. But you'll know when I fire it up. The ignorant and those that are out of the way. Romans 3:16 and 17, destruction and misery are in their ways, in their road, in the path that they choose, and the way of peace they have not known. Their life is that way because they are that way, because of the road they choose, and they don't know the other road. You understand what I'm saying in that? As long as their ways stay their ways, destruction and misery is going to be the net result of their life. It's in their ways, but they don't know the way of peace. And the way they are is their normal. And that's what I want to speak to, and I feel like we need to speak to today. And when we seek to do ministry, when we seek to do ministry in a way that those who are out of the way are only seen as in our way, that's not ministry, that's abuse. When we seek to do ministry, when those that are not like us and strange, when those that are out of the way are seen only as something that's in our way and needs to be removed, and all we want is for them to go away, that's not ministry, that's abuse. If I could think of the man's name, I'd say it, because Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, if only there were a group of people somewhere, and our only task was to find them, isolate them, and destroy them. But the line that divides good from evil runs through the middle of every man's heart. And who wants to destroy part of his own heart? I do. I want to get that part that's wrong. Let me just say this in a disclaimer. If this thing is like what I said about Joey, if this message goes south, blame Charlie, because he inspired some things and some things he said. So biblically, what is a stranger? To the Jew, anybody that was not a Jew was a stranger. Anybody that's not one of us and not like us and don't do it our way, that's a stranger. Isn't it? The old Quaker said, sometime I think the whole world's strange except me and thee, and I have my doubts about thee. Okay. Jesus said I was hungry and you fed me, you gave me meat. There was a day when I think in this country that hunger was not what it is today. Okay. To not have enough to put food on the table. Debbie and I go to Walmart and I'm thinking, dear God, what do people with 4 or 5 kids do? What about the hunger situation and the food situation in this day? Because it's pretty serious. I was hungry and you put something on my table, and you can just check that off. Kevin and the Food for the Hungry are doing that. Hope for the Hungry are speaking into that need that's very unique to the day that we're in. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. Okay? Check Kevin, because he loaded Jimmy down with a whole truckload of bottled water for FCA. And all this stuff's connecting around. See, each thing speaks to a need. I was naked and you clothed me. Check the Lewis County Food and Clothing Bank. Okay. You can go out there and clothe your whole family probably for $100. Okay. Where one piece would cost. I mean, if you will go through, and then we're starting the clothing closet here. You got a name for that thing? Got to have something about it. Hope for the holidays, there's a clothing part of that for kids. And folks, that's different. But then he said, I was a stranger and you took me in. And you know the thing about inasmuch as you've done to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it unto me. And if you didn't do it to them, you did it not to me. He takes an identity in the way he ministers to the needs of people. And you see what the hungry need is food. And what the thirsty need is drink. And what the naked need is clothing. And what the stranger needs is somebody that takes them in. That will take them in. Okay? And first, you take them into your heart. Your heart needs to go out to that's who can have compassion on the stranger. I need to read a verse from Malachi 3. Bobby, I'm giving you a warning again. I'm headed to Malachi 3. I'm going to read a few verses, and I'm going to talk to you out of the heart of this house and my heart. In Malachi 3, verse 5, God's dealing with his own people. And he said, I will come near to you. Aren't you glad God's going to draw near to you? I'm coming near to you to judgment. And I will be a swift witness, I won't be long about it, against the sorcerers, against the adulterers, which covers all sexual sin, against false swearers, liars, against those that oppress the hireling in his wages, who oppress the widow and the fatherless, and who turn aside the stranger from his right, and fear me not, saith the Lord. The way I treat a stranger is a reflection of whether I fear God or not. And they turn away the stranger from his right, and he's going to deal with all that. And, I read where Jerry Cook told about he was speaking to a young evangelist who had a heart and a fire for God, and he was very powerful and very effective in his evangelism, and God used him mightily, but Jerry knew that he hadn't always been an evangelist. Jerry knew that the man had spent much of his life homeless on the streets because of, he was a drug addict and a dealer and a pimp, and he's lived on the streets. And he said, I asked him, what's the worst part of living on the street? What's the worst thing? The cold and the heat, just the elements that you deal with. What's the worst thing? The hunger, what you go through, the danger, the fears, the lack of security and protection. And the young man said, no, none of that's close. He said, the worst thing of living on the street for me was nobody would see me. Nobody would even acknowledge and look at the fact I was there. Do I need to have people raise their hands? When we used to go to church in Jackson, and we went through a pretty rough section in Jackson, and I was always sure when we hit that section that the doors were locked. And I don't know why, but you see a young man that's broken walking down the street, and it's almost like you make it a point not to make eye contact, because it pulls on something in you. Now I'm going to read from Psalm 142 in David's prayer, part of David's prayer, because when David prayed this, he was homeless. He was living in a cave. Okay. David was a caveman. David said, my spirit was overwhelmed within me. You need to meditate that verse a long time. When your spirit is overwhelmed within you, inside, I was dying on the inside. And what's going on? My spirit was overwhelmed within me, and I looked on my right hand and beheld, but there was no man that would know me. There were probably people who want you to get your ticket signed to go to heaven, but they don't want to pay the price to know you. There was no man that would know me. Refuge failed me. No man cared for my soul. I'm just still talking to you about what a stranger is. You think David felt like a stranger in what he said? I'm dying on the inside. My spirit's overwhelmed. I looked around for help. There was no man that would know me. No man cared for my soul. One more from Job 19. My kinfolk have failed me. Family breakdown. My familiar friend has forgotten me. I'm out there. They that dwell in my house and my maidens count me for a stranger. I am an alien in their sight. They see me as alienated from them and their life. So we come to the New Testament in John chapter 8, and the Pharisees and the scribes bring the woman that's taken in adultery in the very act before Jesus and say this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. And this they said tempting him. They're not looking for an answer. I'll speak to that in a minute. They said Moses in the law commanded that such should be stoned. Moses in the law said people like her, people like this should be stoned. And here's the key thing. What sayest thou? What do you say about this? So we have this great increase, at least they say we do, of a population and a problem with the homeless in Hohenwald. It is a political hot potato right now in this city, okay? I hope they got something solved before election time. Strangers in our streets. What are they doing here? And there's a whole lot being said about these strangers in our streets and why they're here. But what sayest thou? What do you say? A couple of years back, we're having our discussion at the prayer breakfast about the problem of the homeless. And we ought to do something. Right now, I'm talking to Bruce. Jackson's in the process of building $1.5 million structure, shelter for the homeless. Okay? This is not unique to here. It's worldwide. And it's a spirit that's got to be dealt with. And we're talking probably 2 years ago, a couple of years back anyway, about wisdom and how to handle wisdom and minister to and care for and meet the needs. And one of my pastor friends, who is a great friend and loves God and loves souls, he said, well, if you build a nice shelter here in Hohenwald and meet their needs, they're fixing to be coming here from all communities around, so that's better off left alone. And I'm thinking, dear God, listen to what you just said. Listen to what you said and see your heart. Because they will. They'll see your heart, and they'll know whether you care about them or trying to get rid of a problem. And hear our heart in this, because they're going to hear and they're going to see. And what is what we're doing saying? What are you saying in the way we look at this thing and the way we handle? What? I know what the media is saying out there. I've watched some of the programs. I was talking to Brian and Dee Dee, and they've been on vacation and did a night in D.C., and basically the homeless own the streets. They own them. Okay? And I know, I've heard it too many times, that all of us know that every homeless person standing on any street corner asking for an arm and needs, and I know every one of them drive a brand new Cadillac that's hidden right around the corner. And they ride a Rolex, and they live in a mansion somewhere. So you can just keep your nickel. You're excused from me trying to minister to their need. But I'm not sure that that's the way this thing works. I'm sure that there are people who play on that. But if that's your heart and that's what you see, please stay home. Leave them alone. I say, if we're going to err, and we are going to err, let us err on the side of grace. Okay. Let us miss it on the side of grace. So let me just talk about the way this thing's shaking down in this town, and my heart, and where the heart of this house has got to connect to some things. Brother Jeff Gandy from Blondie called me this week, and he'd got a call from a, quote, governmental official. I'll leave the names out to protect the guilty. And they're going to have another meeting because homelessness is still a problem, and still something needs to be done, and they're seeking answers. And they want Jeff to come to that meeting, and Jeff said, if you ain't going, I ain't going. And we're going. And we're going with loaded guns. Okay? Because there's a side issue that's hiding in this thing. There's always somebody that gets on the bandwagon of something that's wrong that needs to be dealt with to sell their goods. And they're determined, for some reason, to connect the homeless problem in this town to the Hope Center ministries that have come to this town. They're determined. We've already been in one extended meeting about that and explained why that was not true, okay? Already spoken to the fact that the Hope Center ministries don't take young men and women, don't put young men and women on the streets, we take them off the streets. And the stats will prove it. And those who have come through the program and what's happening, but now the word is that's different, okay? Because there have been 3 at the park that have been talked to, and what they said is they came here to be a part and go into the Hope Center ministries and the drug program, and they didn't know about the $750 it took to get in, and now they're homeless on the street, and so the drug problem caused a problem. To which I say, let's all stand and sing the Oscar Mayer song, old B-O-L-O-G-N-A. Baloney. Okay? That's all it is. I need to leave that alone right there. Number one, I don't know of one person that's ever been turned away from that program because they didn't have $750. Not one. Okay? Not one. And what that program's done for the vision of God and God's heart for people in the body of Christ in this town, and making disciples of Christ out of those who are trying to minister to those men. They came here to teach the church how to be church. You think because we sit in service Sunday morning, how many consumer units did you have in your church on Sunday? We're here to make a difference in the community that we live in and in the world God's placed us in for such a time as this. Few, very few, very, very few of people in either one of the men's center program or the women's center program paid their own price. Almost none. Very few. It's got nothing to do with anything. I just carried Brother Greg Smith, who's Hohenmall Church of Christ, who's the treasurer over the coalition who funds the extra funds to get folks in. I just carried him a $2,500 check from the Lewis County Ministers Association, a $1,000 check from this church, and a $500 personal check for $4,000 so 6 more people can get in that program. Okay? And if you hadn't done anything, you keep quiet. Okay? If you hadn't been involved in any way, if you won't pick at this sore, you can pick at a sore with me pretty quick. Because God's put his favor on it, I suggest you keep your hands off of it. Number 2, none of those who say they came in here to get in this program and were turned away have even talked to Jeff or Stick, who interview everybody coming into the program, have made any effort, done any paperwork. That is baloney. That's all it is. Now, your pastor's opinion about why? There are some voices from parts unknown and people unknown who choose to stay unknown. There is a negative voice that wants to rise against anything positive God is doing, because the good old boy system that's controlled this town is coming down. It's a cheap shot at the Lewis County Ministers Association, at the Lewis County Faith-Based Recovery Coalition, and at the Drug Center Ministry, because we made a huge dent in the drug deal in this town. Okay? And we ain't through. Okay? And fellas, you ain't seen nothing yet. This is condemnation. That light has come unto Hohenwald, and men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. And these that are hiding under the cover and mouthing, the cover's about to be stripped. I suggest if you know who they are, you put some distance between you and them. Number 3, since the Hope Center ministries are graduating about 40 a year, and that will increase. Since they graduate about 40 people a year through their program, and since Buffalo, a year-long program, since Buffalo Valley graduates 4,000 a year through a 30-day program, maybe you need to dig a little deeper to see where the problem might be and who's bringing what to town. So Tanya calls me Wednesday, I think Wednesday this week, and there's a homeless man that's thinks he's asleep, but he's passed out against the back of the 29 building over here. And she's fixing to have about 100 kids here in a few minutes. And for his own sake and sanity, he needs to be somewhere else. He can't be here when the kids get here. And she calls the chief of police. That man was arrested on Tuesday the 29th at 9:45. And he was released on Tuesday the 29th at 3 p.m. I don't know what that's about, but we should know. That's a person. We need to know what happened. He was on our property. We need to know. And then he's arrested again Wednesday the 30th when he's out here and can't walk. But do you know what he told them? Told her? He was looking for Buffalo Valley. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means when he came to this town, he was looking for that program, or he thought this building looked like, well, he's pretty messed up. 10 or 12 years ago, some of you could probably date this better than I can. This is why I tell all of you, quote, younger folk, keep a journal. 10 or 12 years ago, we find Lurch. Jordan, was his last name DeVoe? Don, do you remember? Jordan DeVoe? We find Jordan, who is 6'7" with a mohawk, sleeping on Tanya's bus. He was a stranger, and we took him in. We took him into our basement for 6 or 8 months. I don't know how long. I wish we kept patrolling. And it was required that he get his GED. He needed that. And then we carried him to classes, and he did all the studying. He was ready to take it, but he'd never take it. And he had to get a job. And so I carried him all the way out to Walmart, and he's going to walk back toward town and put in the application everywhere, and he carried a big boom box with him. I said, Jordan, you just want to stay at the house. Well, I thought if I carried this boo box, they'd think I was serious. I said, they'll think you're crazy. And he left here, went home to Cincinnati, Ohio, and in a year and a half, 2 years, overdosed and died. I'll always remember our first meal. Y'all know about the last meal? Our first meal, we'd taken him into the basement. He ate with us most of the time. He came up, and Debbie, we'd had a busy day. She fixed ham sandwiches, and we had whole wheat bread. And he said, I don't like whole wheat bread. You know what she said? You don't like whole wheat bread? He's a stranger among us. But Jordan came here with the fair. And we were feeding the fair workers at that time. Over here, brought them all in, usually 50 or 60, a home-cooked meal every day, and loved on them. And he experienced that. And I don't think he came here looking for anything but love and hope. Over 9 years ago, Tanya, maybe you're talking date this, but Tanya gets a call from Marrow's Food Town, what it was then, which Power is now, but they called and said there's a man sitting against the front of their building. He's from California. He's got a backpack on his back, and he's got his mother's ashes in an urn on in his hands, and he seems to be depressed. Will y'all see if you can do anything? And we go up there and meet Dale. It's another one of them California folk. You just watch these California. He came here to be with his fiancée, who came here to be with her sister, who lives on a farm with some guy out between here and Linden where there's drugs happening. Okay. And now he's on the street. And we're talking about how did people wind up this way? And Brian Lee would go pick the man up at the highway between here and bring him to church on Sunday morning. And it was, well, they don't care. We friends on Facebook. It is Dale and Corey. And Dale would come to church and Corey didn't, or Corey would come and Dale didn't. And he said, they won't let us both go at once. We're held captive out there. And they won't let us. And I'm ready to sing the Oscar Mayer song again. Not Blondie. Don't give me that. But then Ryan Lee said to send a SWAT team in to get Corey and Dale out of the helicopter and all. I said, you're kidding me. And we go to court with them, these strangers among us in Linden. And there's a man, I'd say, who works for Brian Lee right now. Been to prison since then. But him and his brother are sitting there, and I'm thinking, they look like they'd like to kill us. And they did some time, and then they wound up in Buffalo Valley and came to church here. And I'm thinking we baptized the guy. You know, that's strange. I mean, they were from California too. And after court, AC after court, and we went to court, and after everything, he's in Linden, and we get a call from an official, somebody with the sheriff's department there, and they want a meeting with us. You remember this at the Commodore Hotel over there in a room. They want us to meet. Well, Dale's there. And what they want is for us to get him out of Linden and in Hohenwald. They want to get rid of him. So here we go. We moved the man into our basement. But they're not married, so her and the kid live with Jimmy and Kathy until we get them married. Strangers. Just. Debbie and I got a call. Lord, I don't know. It's been a while back. The young lady is 20 years old. She has a 19-month-old daughter, I think. 20-year and 2-years-old daughter. And she's on the streets. She's 20. She's living with a 50-year-old man that she's been with since she was 16 and dropped out of school. First time, lived with him. They got a child. He's kicked her out. I called Pastor Val, and he said, that's no problem. Move her back in, get a warrant, kick him out. I said, they're not married. He said, that's a problem. She has no rights. She has no car, no driver's license, don't need a car or driver's license. She's never been behind a wheel. Never driven. She's never had a job. She's a young mother with a child on the streets. Is that a stranger among us? And this, how did she wind up? Debbie spent the day with her. This is before Debbie could have done this a lot better if Hope for the Hungry had existed then. But she spent a day going all over town getting her signed up for everything she needed to be signed up for, and getting diapers and wipes and formula for that baby and everything we could get anywhere. And I'm making calls to Jackson, and we get her in the Dream Center at Jackson, and immediately they set her up to get her GED and driver's ed and a job, and I mean, they're putting her life back together. He called and asked her to come back, and she went back to him. Can I tell you one more? Corey Pitts was working for Michael James in the sawmill in the logwoods, and Corey was going by picking the guy up at the jail. I think it was Pumpkin. And he's picking the guy up for work release, and he'd go work, and Corey carried him back at the end of the day, and he'd be in jail for the night, and he could work the next day. He was on work release like that. And he called me, and he said, I carried Pumpkin back and said, there's this guy out there that I sort of knew that he's really messed up. Said he has nowhere to go. He's in trouble. About all he has is a warrant against him. I thank for fighting. And Corey brings him, we meet over here in the old sanctuary, and I talk to the young man, and we share the gospel. He prays and accepts the prayer, prays the prayer and accepts the Lord, gives his life to the Lord. And I've got him set up to go to the Dream Center in Jackson. But the problem is that's the next day. And I know if I put him on the street, I'm never going to find him again. So we put him in the bedroom across the hall from our bedroom. His street name is Taz. And he sort of looked like Taz. So we put him across the hall from us, and I closed our bedroom door and locked it. Slid the dresser up against it, loaded my shotgun and set it beside the bed, and we went to sleep. And the next day carried him to Jackson, and he did the program through, and I don't think he ever came back here. I think he did well. Okay. In the last week or so, Debbie's got a call from a young mother of 4 who's living in her car, who has nowhere to go and no money to get there. And the message Debbie gets said, can you help me? And my question is, can we help you do what? How do you even begin to speak to this? We had a young man that was part of this church, and he called me and said, Pastor, my daughter, who was part of this church, she's 16, said she got up in my face and I popped her on the behind and left a mark. She showed it at school, the Department of Children's Services is called, and I'm homeless. I can't go back in our home till after he has a court date. People get homeless all kind of ways. And we're back to the basement. He lived 3 or 4 weeks. When Bobby and Tanya came here, they lived 2 years in our basement. They were homeless. And Chad and Jamie. Tanya will tell you that less than 700 square feet with 5 people and 3 kids homeschooling is homeless. Especially if the water gets right and it floods. My point in all of this is people are people. And people are homeless, and they're strangers in our streets for all kind of different multitude of reasons. And you got to speak to that. God is not looking for people who have answers and who have resources. God is looking for people who have compassion. And if they have compassion, he will give them answers and resources. Okay. He will, and the church is fixing to rise up in this community together and speak to this. Okay. And we have missed a lot of cues and clues that we could be way ahead in this game. Okay. What needs to happen when you talk to them at the park and they tell you why they came here is hand them a piece of paper and a form that gets who they are, where they came from, where did you come from, who is your family, what is your story, and get that story down. And if they need a bus ticket, get them a bus ticket. Okay? If that's what they need. If they want to be here, then try to connect and minister and speak to that need somehow. I have a dream for a dream center in Hohenwald. Okay? And a lot of the components of that vision are already operable in Operation Hope and the after school and the Hope for the Hungry that's happening there, and what's happening with the Lewis County Faith-Based Recovery Coalition and the Hope Center Ministry. A lot of that, the food bank out there, a lot of those elements are already operative in this if we could put it together as a vision and see it as a dream center. Now, the reason I said what I said about Charlie is something happened in your pastor last week when Charlie shared about the lady that they picked up and took home with them. I was an alien and a stranger, and nobody would know me. Well, good. They act like they wanted to know her. Was she hitchhiking or just walking? She just walking. That's what I thought. And when he shared that we turned around, stopped, and went back and picked her up and carried her home with us, I heard some of you suck the air out of the building. I know how strange that is. When you minister to strange people, you got to do strange things. Yeah. When he shared that story, I saw the man that I used to be and that I'm not anymore. And that bothers me. I read a thing where a pastor of a large church said, "Dear God, am I going to have to quit ministry to do what God's called me to do?" And I had flashbacks to a night. Some of y'all won't know where Magic Valley is, but that's between Henderson and Pinson. A little community called Magic Valley in 4-lane, and Debbie and I are going through there, and it is a dark, rainy night, and there's a lady walking. Remember Debbie? And she's wet, and she's madder than an old wood hen. She's mad at the world. And we turned around, went back, picked her up, and she said, "There's a lot of negative energy in this place." Thinking, I can't tell her, but there ain't no such thing as negative energy. And good and bad vibes. There's angels and demons, and you connect to one of them by your choices. Okay. But we carried her wherever it was that she thought she needed to be and wanted to go. When Tanya called last Wednesday about the homeless man that's out here, I had just blew it big time. Completely blown it. Okay. Because at lunchtime, Debbie wanted to go to the Chinese and eat Chinese buffet. She wants to go there all the time, and I go with her. You gotta love a buffet. Buffet stands for big, ugly, fat folk eating together. That's what it stands for. She hates it because the MSG, the monosodium glutamate, gives her a headache. And it's her least favorite place, but I like to go, and she goes with me. We're going there trying to enjoy our buffet, and Tanya and Christian and Simone walk in. And we fellowship, and both of us had the same idea at the same time. We want to buy their lunch. And we cut ahead and we bought their lunch. When we walked out that door, there's a young homeless man standing there, and I've been watching him. I saw him when we went in. I know what he's doing. I know where he's hanging, and I know why. Okay. I've been watching him 4 or 5 years. First time we met was right out there on the back of this church, and he's trying to get up enough money to get to Alabama and go home. That's 4 or 5 years ago. He's still walking the streets here. And when I walk out, he said, "Would you happen to have a couple of..." I said, "No." I said, "You've been walking these streets way too long. You need to get you a job." And he tried to say something else, and I walked off. And you talking about blown it as a minister? So, if God will grant me grace, I'm going to find that young man, and I'm going to look him in the eye, and we're going to make a connection. And I am going to get determined to know them. Okay? Because their biggest problem is not they don't have a home, it's that nobody knows them. Nobody will know them. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apologize. I told somebody this morning, Hebrews 3:7, "Wherefore, as the Holy Ghost said, today if you will hear God's voice," if you want to hear God, harden not your heart. You know why? Because you can't hear God speak to something you've hardened your heart against. And there's a lot out there that will allow them to be those people and us not have a heart for them. And God's speaking to this thing, folk. What if they didn't come to Hohenwald looking for Hope Center Ministries, and they didn't really come to Hohenwald looking for Buffalo Valley, or come here because of a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a job? What if they came looking for compassion among the people? Because I think that's why Jordan came back from the fair. We loved on them all week. If you wonder why we still don't feed the fair, they quit coming. We were feeding, and it was 75% Hispanic, and they switched to white South African, and they didn't come to the free meal. We're cooking for 16, 16's coming, and that don't work. And just, let me say this about all of this. If I have to choose between being right and having the right answer and compassion, give me compassion. Okay? Give me a heart that cares. For a long time, when Debbie and she don't know I spoke to this. When Debbie and I would go to Columbia and back, I'd look out there at Fall Hollow, and that place is full. Absolutely full of campers. Full. And I'm thinking, I told Debbie, I said, what is the draw? There ain't that many people up and down the trace. There's nothing here but a 6-inch deep creek, maybe 6 inches wide. Creek, it's nothing, it's just no draw. And then I'm talking to John Rawton, and John said, that's their home. They pay $600 to $800 a month for a lot to put their camper on, but all of their utilities and all their internet and all their garbage and everything, and so they choose to live there. That's strange to me, but it ain't strange to them. And there's a whole community of people out there that we choose not to know. The motel right down there, she tells us they stay mostly full with people from Nashville who can't afford to rent an apartment in Nashville, can rent a room there cheaper, and raising their kids in that motel room. So, what is homeless? There's a story that's been told for years. Can I tell a story that's not spiritual, but it carries a deep spiritual truth? It's about the guy that saved up a long time and thought he had enough, and he went in and looked at a brand new Rolls Royce car. And he asked the salesman, said, how much is this one right here? And the salesman said, if you have to ask the price, you can't afford it. In changing broken people's lives, if you have to ask the price, you can't afford it. But if compassion will cause you to move no matter what it costs, you'll see something done. C.T. Studd, the missionary to China, said, some want to live within the sound of church and chapel bell. Me, I want a rescue shop within a yard of hell. And there's a reason God shaped our heart. Okay? Who are these strangers in our street, and who is this stranger in me sometime? What if we stopped them coming to us and asking for something by going to them first? And seeking to minister to them. Just a thought. This to me has been a Deuteronomy chapter 8 week, where God through Moses said to the people of Israel, you need to remember the way. You need to remember the road that I brought you down to get you where you are, to do what I want to do with you. And that's really what I've been doing. All this message. I've been remembering the road that brought us where we are. It's been a week in review. Some of you won't know, but some of y'all remember Gilman. And that was before we came here. Debbie went to a nurse practitioner, a doctor there named Rick Ricard. And Rick knew our heart for ministry. And he said, Debbie, there is a man out here who falls through all the cracks. Everything that could, he just misses everything everywhere. And we went, he gave us a name and an address, and we went and found Gilman. And he was living in a house that they had moved when they widened the Highway 45, and you could see daylight around the walls. And they had 110 heater that was spliced into a tore-up extension cord to heat that house. He had one mattress in the floor, and he had a 2x8 over 2 concrete blocks that was his couch. And no one would know him. You know why? He's a 61-year-old homosexual sawmill worker. He was a sawyer, which is a good job at the sawmill. He worked 2 8-hour shifts, but he drank and gambled all his money away. And when I got to know him, when he was born, he was what they called then a blue baby. And his mother basically told him he'd never be able to cross the street on his own. His mother did not let him go to school because if he went to school, they might draft him and get him in the military and he'd get killed. And it was just a whole life of brokenness and dysfunction. And we took him into our house, 6 or 8 months? How long did he live there? Long enough that he fell through all the cracks and nobody could get his disability. And the doctor himself said he bad needs it. His back is gone. Okay. And once again, when she got through with Social Security, they said, just give it. She got his disability in an unbelievable amount of time. Do you know the last thing that we heard from Gilman? Debbie's working at Southwest Human Resource Agency, which she loved, in the elderly care management. And she pulls in and there's a sheriff car there waiting for her. And said, your life has been threatened. Gilman has gone to get his deposit on his utilities back, and the lady wouldn't give it to him. And he said, I ought to key you. I will kill Debbie Grimes. That's why I say if you had, we remember Miss DeFord. In elderly care management, Debbie goes into a rundown trailer on the edge of Jackson, and what you notice first about that trailer is roaches, rats, and maggots. It was rough. Tanya went with her and went outside and puked. When she found him, he's sitting in his recliner because he can't get out and sitting in his own mess with maggots on a sore on his knee. She got them out, got them in an apartment in Henderson that Chester Weaver was over those apartments. Debbie goes in one day to try to help Mr. Ford. She's very close to the meanest woman that ever walked this earth. You talking about strength? She would fight anybody that tried to help her. And we were determined to help her. And Chester said, Debbie, you need to know I don't believe a word of this, but Mr. Ford is telling that you're stealing everything she's got. Debbie said, that's okay, Chester, because she's telling me that you're stealing everything she's got. So you want to be a minister, and you want to make a difference. And all of that, I think, folk, in all those years, has been preparation for the heart we need to speak to what we're into. What's happening with this homeless thing has just tore Kevin apart. And that's what it's supposed to do. Literally, when Jesus saw the multitudes and had compassion on them, it means his bowels gushed out toward them. It's just a night. And I think God is fixing to raise up a people in this town to speak to the situation in this town. I think immediately we need to, in the coalition, not this house, but me and Jeff and those who deal with the folk, we need to immediately generate a card of hope. This is who we are. This is where we'll be if you need us. Or we can do like Pilate. We can wash our hands and say, we're innocent of this man's blood. No, you're not. That's all we need is another burden, isn't it, Tanya? Would you stand with me? I believe in this house and in this, what God has done in this town and what God's done in the coalition. And I believe, Charlie, in the heart that God's given you to in reaching out. And that's not the first time that's happened. But something that was said this morning, that these strangers in our streets, those who are ignorant and out of the way, you'll meet more of them in the halls of that hospital called doctors than you'll meet on the streets. And God's heart is just as real toward redeeming them. Let us always be a people who are redemptive. God was in Christ, reconciling a broken, stinking, dysfunctional, fallen world unto himself. And he has given us the word and the ministry of reconciliation. And what they need is to be reconciled to God. And what we need and who we are and what we're doing is to be reconciled to the heart of God toward these things that are in front of us. Would you pray and dream toward this thing looking more like a dream center? I think in ministries that we see that are so fascinating and effective, we see the success and the truth of what it's doing, but we very seldom get into the very blood and guts of those that make it happen. If you have to ask, how much would this cost me? You can't afford it. When Jesus decided to reconcile and redeem your life, he knew the price. When he went to that cross, he knew the price of reconciliation. And in my heart of hearts, salvation is about he gave his whole self for me. That's all he asked in return. And folks, this is the way that we change our world. And this is where we are. So I want you in special prayer about this meeting Tuesday night. Because Jeff and I have already talked about staying in a right spirit in the midst of it, so they can see hope and redemption in him and not in us, in the way we present this thing. Would you pray for divine encounters with these strangers in the street? Instead of praying that you don't have to see them, pray that God brings them into your path and you get to see them. And all these voices are saying this. But the question is, what sayest thou? What are you saying? Until we have our heart settled in Jesus and Jesus settled in our heart, we are just another stranger in the streets of life. And we don't understand what it's about. But if you will get your life on the altar before God, well, that's what work out your own salvation with fear and trembling is about. There's something that you and only your life can touch, that nobody else can touch. And folk, if I get to drive the bus, this is where this bus is going. And I would rather them be in my face constantly than I never get to see them. Go read Psalm 142. My spirit was overwhelmed inside of me. I'm just run down and broken with the dysfunctions of life. And I don't know where to go and I don't know what to do. And I looked to the right and to the left. And there was no man that would know me. Do you want to know them? And there's so many scriptures that speak to it. But let me challenge you in your heart and in your life to know God knows who you are and God knows where you are. And God knows the needs of every person that you will encounter. And if you will have compassion on them, God will give the answers and the resources that are needed for their redemption. Paul calls it in Timothy, in meekness instructing those who oppose themselves. And the love of God will cover a multitude of sins. See, I believe that you can cover them to a large degree even where they are. Father, help us to be your people, your voice. People that want to know broken, dysfunctional people. Help us to be those who will say what you're saying and speak your hope in your life. And I just pray that among us you give us a vision and eyes to see and to recognize and opportunities to know, that we might know them, that they might know you. And we bless this house. I bless this house with the heart of God in this, in Jesus' name. Amen.